Now to an Eyewitness News investigation into what's essentially becoming homeless encampments on wheels. So-called van lords are renting out RVs to people who are now using them as their permanent residence.
In California, the reality no one wants to admit is finally exploding into view. Entire families, seniors, veterans, and working people are piling into RVs because they have nowhere else to go. Cities are cracking down, towing is accelerating, and winter storms are closing in. 2026 is the moment everything breaks, because this crisis is no longer manageable, no longer ignorable, and no longer something California can hide. California's homelessness crisis has reached a critical point, with over 200,000 homeless residents statewide. Between 15,000 and 20,000 people now live in RVs, vans, and cars, according to county-level reports. This dramatic shift reflects California's deepening affordability crisis, where median rent for a one-bedroom apartment exceeds $3,000 monthly in coastal cities. Traditional housing has become unattainable for large segments of the population, facing stagnant wages and record-breaking rent increases. As shelters fill beyond capacity, Californians increasingly turn to vehicles as their last remaining form of controlled, private shelter. Vehicle homelessness has grown especially quickly in the Bay Area, Los Angeles, and Sacramento corridors. Some cities report 30% increases in vehicle dwelling since 2022. The trend accelerates as more families lose housing through eviction, job loss, or medical expenses. RVs provide insulation, security, and stability compared to tent living, but their growing numbers create challenges for municipalities. Cities struggle to balance humanitarian needs with neighborhood concerns about sanitation, parking, and public safety. California's unusually high cost of living combined with a persistent housing shortage exceeding 1 million units means vehicle homelessness is no longer a fringe issue. It has become one of the state's most significant indicators of economic inequality, affecting working families, seniors, and disabled individuals who once maintained stable housing. The crisis continues expanding into 2026. Starting in late 2024 and accelerating into 2025, California cities passed increasingly strict ordinances targeting long-term RV parking on public streets. San Francisco banned RVs from parking longer than 24 hours in many neighborhoods, marking one of the most aggressive enforcement waves in the region. Los Angeles expanded no oversized vehicle zones to more than 2,000 new blocks. San Diego increased fines for oversized parking violations to hundreds of dollars per citation. These laws, while aimed at reducing sidewalk congestion and safety hazards, effectively criminalize RV living for thousands of people with no alternative shelter. Restrictions come with escalating penalties, first warnings, then citations, then towing. This disproportionately impacts residents already living below the poverty line. A single citation costs $65 to $150, and repeated violations quickly accumulate into unpayable debt. The crackdown extends beyond large cities. Smaller communities like Pacifica, Fremont, and Mountain View implemented similar ordinances after receiving homeowner complaints. These enforcement measures aim to clear streets but fail to address root causes like housing shortages and rising rent. Cities show no signs of loosening restrictions as 2026 approaches. The result creates rising conflict between survival and municipal order. Thousands of RV residents face constant displacement, burning fuel they cannot afford while relocating repeatedly. Enforcement treats vehicle dwelling as a nuisance issue rather than recognizing it as California's poverty crisis manifesting on city streets. As crackdowns expand, advocacy groups warn that enforcement measures deepen poverty and push RV residents into unlivable conditions. Organizations like the ACLU argue that towing or ticketing someone's home does not resolve homelessness. It accelerates it. A recent Bay Area survey found over 70% of vehicle dwellers lost housing due to economic hardship, not criminal behavior. Yet enforcement actions treat RV living as nuisance rather than poverty crisis. When RV residents receive multiple citations, their ability to legally park diminishes. Many relocate constantly, burning fuel they cannot afford while experiencing ongoing stress from police interactions. Advocates report rising mental health issues and increased instability as families face repeated displacement. RV residents with disabilities or chronic illnesses face particular vulnerability. Once towed, their shelter, medication, clothing, and documents may be permanently lost. A Stanford study noted that losing a vehicle home leads to a 200 to 300% increase in the likelihood of chronic homelessness. Critics argue that enforcement without housing pathways is not only ineffective, but counterproductive, creating long-term social costs that far exceed the expense of providing structured, safe parking lots or transitional housing. As 2026 approaches, backlash against enforcement grows louder, demanding a shift toward support rather than punishment. Advocates emphasize that RV residents are not criminals. They are working families, seniors, and disabled individuals pushed into vehicles by California's affordability crisis. Enforcement-only strategies fail to acknowledge this fundamental reality. One of the most devastating consequences of California's crackdown is widespread towing of RVs that act as people's only asset and primary shelter. When cities tow an RV, the owner must pay towing fees ranging from $400 to $1,500, daily storage charges of $60 to $120, and accumulated citations. Most RV residents earn low or unstable incomes and cannot afford these costs. According to regional impound data, over 80% of towed RVs are never reclaimed. Once the RV is gone, so is the resident's last major possession. The loss forces people into tents, sidewalks, or emergency shelters already operating beyond capacity. For families, the impact is catastrophic. Children lose stable places to sleep and study, leading to further trauma. Essential documents, medications, tools, and personal items are often destroyed after mandatory impound periods. Cities report towing hundreds of RVs monthly, with some communities doubling removal numbers between 2023 and 2025. While officials argue that towing addresses safety and sanitation concerns, it produces long-term homelessness for the majority of those affected. By stripping vulnerable people of their only asset, towing accelerates the crisis instead of resolving it. This policy creates a devastating cycle. Economic hardship pushes people into RVs. Enforcement targets those RVs. Towing strips away the last asset, and individuals fall into deeper homelessness with virtually no path back to stability. California cities are spending unprecedented amounts managing RV homelessness, stretching municipal budgets already burdened by inflation and declining revenue. Los Angeles allocated tens of millions of dollars to sanitation, towing, law enforcement, and encampment management in 2024 to 2025. San Diego spent over $9 million on RV enforcement operations alone in one fiscal year. Smaller cities like Santa Cruz and Mountain View diverted significant funds to towing, signage, administrative staff, and cleanup crews. These expenses compete with funding for schools, road repairs, and affordable housing development, creating public frustration and political tension. Police departments report that responding to RV-related calls consumes thousands of officer hours annually, pulling resources away from other public safety needs. Mayor offices face pressure from residents demanding immediate action, but lack long-term solutions needed to stabilize the crisis. With no consistent statewide strategy, individual cities piece together fragmented policies at enormous cost. The financial burden has reached a point where local officials question whether enforcement is sustainable. As 2026 approaches, many cities face difficult decisions: continue pouring money into crackdowns that offer short-term results, or shift resources into shelter expansion, safe parking infrastructure, and comprehensive outreach programs addressing root causes. The enforcement-heavy approach proves extremely expensive, while failing to reduce overall homelessness numbers. Cities essentially spend millions to move people from one street to another, rather than investing in permanent solutions that would ultimately cost less while restoring stability. As more people live in RVs, California cities face escalating sanitation challenges, fire hazards, and public safety complaints. Many older RVs have non-functioning plumbing, leading to wastewater disposal issues that cities struggle to manage. Los Angeles sanitation workers reported removing over 2,000 gallons of waste in certain cleanup operations, highlighting infrastructure strain. Fire departments respond to frequent calls involving propane leaks, electrical malfunctions, and heater-related fires, particularly in aging RVs used as permanent homes. In 2025, several cities saw double-digit increases in RV fires, with some resulting in fatalities. Residents living near RV clusters often report concerns about trash accumulation, blocked sidewalks, and reduced nighttime visibility on narrow streets. These issues create tension between housed residents and RV dwellers, with both sides feeling unheard. For RV residents, lack of access to restrooms, electricity, and water makes daily life extremely challenging, often forcing makeshift solutions that increase safety risks. Cities have attempted to mitigate pressures through scheduled cleanups or mobile service teams, but demand far outweighs supply. With winter storms becoming more severe, the combination of faulty heating systems, flooding streets, and overcrowded areas heightens danger. Sanitation and safety issues now drive major political and community pressure for stricter enforcement in 2026. The crisis reveals a fundamental problem. Without providing basic infrastructure like restrooms, water, and waste disposal, cities ensure that sanitation and safety issues will continue regardless of enforcement intensity. Several California cities have experimented with relocation, hotel voucher, and RV buyout programs, but results remain inconsistent due to limited funding and scale. San Jose launched a notable RV buyback pilot, offering $500 to $1,000 for residents who surrendered old or unsafe vehicles in exchange for temporary housing assistance. While the program successfully cleared certain hotspots, it helped only a small fraction of the total RV population. Many residents declined participation because buyout payments were insufficient to cover new housing costs or replacement vehicles. Hotel voucher programs in Los Angeles and the Bay Area faced similar challenges. Nightly hotel rates often exceed available budgets, and vouchers typically last only 7 to 30 days, leaving families without long-term solutions. Some RV residents report feeling unsafe or restricted in hotel placements, leading to low participation rates. The lack of permanent housing options means individuals often cycle back to RV living after temporary stays expire. Despite these limitations, relocation programs show promise when paired with case management, employment support, and long-term housing pathways. However, scaling these programs statewide would require hundreds of millions of dollars, funding cities do not currently possess. As 2026 approaches, relocation remains an experimental tool, not a comprehensive solution. The fundamental issue is clear. Without addressing California's affordable housing shortage, relocation programs simply move people between different forms of instability, rather than providing pathways to permanent housing and economic stability. California's RV homelessness crisis increasingly affects families with children, one of the most vulnerable groups in the state. Recent surveys estimate that thousands of school-aged children now sleep in RVs, vans, or cars. In San Francisco alone, dozens of families living in RVs formed makeshift communities, relying on mutual aid to survive. Many parents hold multiple jobs yet still cannot afford rent, highlighting the severity of the state's affordability crisis. The impact on children is profound. Irregular sleep, limited weather protection, difficulty accessing school transportation, and lack of privacy contribute to chronic stress. Some school districts report rising absenteeism and academic delays among students living in vehicles. Pediatric health experts warn that unstable housing during childhood dramatically increases the risk of long-term mental health issues, developmental delays, and chronic illness. Families often avoid shelters due to safety concerns, rules prohibiting teens of certain ages, or fears of separation. RV living offers privacy, but comes with significant dangers: fire hazards, mold exposure, extreme temperatures, and lack of clean water. As cities expand enforcement measures, families face increased threats of towing and displacement. If crackdowns accelerate in 2026 without corresponding housing support, experts warn that California may see a surge in generational homelessness with long-lasting consequences. Children growing up in vehicles face disadvantages that compound throughout their lives, potentially creating cycles of poverty that persist for decades while costing society far more than preventing homelessness would have cost. Safe parking lots were designed to provide legal, secure places for people living in vehicles, but California's programs are now overwhelmed by demand. Only a few thousand safe parking spaces exist across the entire state, while the number of vehicle dwellers exceeds 20,000. In Los Angeles, safe parking lots fill up nightly, often turning away dozens of families seeking secure locations. Many lots have strict rules, limited operating hours, or caps on how many nights residents can stay. Some require working engines, insurance, or registration, barriers that exclude many of the most vulnerable RV owners whose vehicles are non-operational. Funding shortages have caused several lots to reduce hours, cut services, or close entirely. The result is a system designed as a bridge to stability becoming a bottleneck that fails to meet real needs. Without major expansion, safe parking cannot relieve pressure from street crackdowns or prevent displacement. As 2026 approaches, overwhelmed safe parking programs highlight a larger issue. California's homelessness strategy relies on temporary solutions that cannot keep pace with rising economic instability and housing shortages. The safe parking model demonstrates potential effectiveness when properly funded and staffed, but current programs serve less than 20% of those needing assistance. Expanding these programs to adequate scale would require coordinated statewide funding and commitment, resources that have not yet materialized despite growing crisis severity. Some California cities are testing innovative approaches to RV homelessness, but results vary widely. Berkeley launched a combined motel shelter and RV buyback strategy backed by federal funding, emphasizing connecting residents to long-term housing rather than simply clearing streets. Early evaluations show improvements in resident stability when services include mental health care, addiction treatment, and financial assistance. San Diego introduced mobile resource trailers, offering sanitation services, medical care, and vehicle repair support in areas with high RV density. Small towns like Cotati and Petaluma experimented with long-term designated RV zones, though these programs face community resistance and zoning challenges. These local experiments often rely on temporary grants or nonprofit partnerships, making them difficult to sustain or scale statewide. Some policies have failed outright, such as parking permit systems that create administrative confusion and do little to reduce homelessness. Others have succeeded only when paired with affordable housing initiatives. With California's housing deficit exceeding 1 million units, local innovations help but cannot address the underlying shortage. As 2026 approaches, policymakers increasingly acknowledge that enforcement alone cannot resolve RV homelessness. Long-term structural solutions such as zoning reform, affordable housing investment, and statewide coordination are required. The most successful programs share common elements: adequate funding, comprehensive services, voluntary participation, and clear pathways to permanent housing. However, replicating these successes statewide remains challenging without coordinated state-level strategy and sustained financial commitment. California has enacted several new laws expanding local authority to remove abandoned or unsafe RVs from public streets. One key measure, AB 630, streamlined the process for towing dilapidated or hazardous vehicles, allowing cities to act more quickly when RVs block traffic or pose health risks. The law was intended to address thousands of abandoned RVs statewide that have become safety hazards and environmental concerns. However, critics argue the law is also being used to target occupied RVs that cannot meet strict mechanical or registration requirements. Many RV residents drive vehicles purchased for as little as $1,000 to $3,000, often in poor condition, making compliance extremely difficult. Once towed, residents face fees they cannot afford, leading to permanent loss of their home. Some cities have reported hundreds of additional tows under the new legal framework. Meanwhile, the state offers limited funding for repair programs, meaning homeless individuals must navigate complex bureaucracy with little support. Lawmakers face increasing pressure to revise or balance towing laws with protections for low-income residents. As 2026 approaches, expanded towing authority may become one of the most controversial aspects of California's homelessness response. The law creates a paradox. Vehicles must meet safety standards to avoid towing, but residents lack resources to make repairs. This ensures that the most vulnerable RV owners face guaranteed displacement regardless of compliance efforts, effectively criminalizing poverty rather than addressing homelessness. Los Angeles County has launched ambitious initiatives like Pathway Home, designed to clear encampments, including RV clusters, while offering housing placement and support services. Unlike traditional sweeps, these programs involve extensive outreach, mental health assessments, addiction support, and transportation to interim housing. In some areas, teams spent months building trust before any relocations occurred. Initial results show promise. Some sites have seen 80 to 90% participation rates, with many residents moving into motels or transitional housing. However, the programs are expensive and resource-intensive. LA County spends millions per encampment, covering hotel vouchers, case managers, transportation, and cleanup. Critics argue that funding limitations mean only a small percentage of RV communities will receive this level of attention. Additionally, some participants struggle to remain housed after the program ends due to job instability, untreated medical conditions, or limited access to permanent housing. While Pathway Home demonstrates that compassionate voluntary approaches can succeed, its scalability is uncertain. If funding decreases in 2026 or demand continues rising, LA may not be able to maintain this model. Pathway Home highlights the tension between effective solutions and the immense cost of addressing widespread homelessness in a fragmented housing market. The program proves that comprehensive, well-funded interventions can successfully transition people into housing, but replicating this approach for California's entire homeless population would require billions in sustained annual funding. Despite millions in investment, many California rehousing efforts struggle to produce strong long-term results. Data from multiple counties shows that only 20 to 35% of people placed in interim housing successfully transition to permanent housing within a year. This is largely due to the lack of affordable units. California's housing deficit remains above 1 million homes, and new construction cannot keep pace with demand. Waiting lists for subsidized housing are often 5 to 10 years long, leaving people trapped in temporary programs. For RV residents, the transition is even harder. Many have pets, disabilities, criminal records, or low credit scores that restrict eligibility. Others rely on their RV as a workspace, storage area, or mobility tool, making adjustment to motel life difficult. Cities frequently clear encampments without ensuring long-term stability, resulting in a cycle where people move from street to shelter to street again. Meanwhile, rising rents, up 20 to 30% in some regions since 2020, make it nearly impossible for minimum wage workers to secure housing. The slow pace of rehousing erodes trust between RV communities and outreach teams. As 2026 approaches, the gap between available housing and the number of people needing shelter continues widening, threatening to overwhelm the system. Without massive increases in affordable housing construction and rental assistance programs, rehousing efforts will continue producing minimal long-term success while consuming enormous resources and failing to prevent new cases of homelessness. California's affordability crisis is the primary force pushing people into RVs. Median rent for a modest apartment exceeds $3,000 in coastal cities and remains above $2,000 in many inland regions. Meanwhile, the state's minimum wage, though higher than the national average, cannot support these costs, even for full-time workers. A minimum wage earner would need to work 2 to 3 full-time jobs to afford a typical one-bedroom unit without exceeding the recommended 30% income threshold. Inflation has further strained budget-constrained families. Groceries have risen 20 to 30% over several years, gasoline remains expensive, and insurance and utility costs continue climbing. Simultaneously, layoffs in tech, manufacturing, and logistics sectors have displaced thousands of workers, many of whom now turn to RV living as a financial survival strategy. Medical bills, student debt, and eviction records further limit access to conventional housing. The combination of high expenses and stagnant wages means even middle-income households are increasingly vulnerable. When savings run out, an RV becomes a last line of protection from street homelessness. Without major economic relief or large-scale housing reforms, experts warn that the economic pressures driving RV homelessness will intensify in 2026. The fundamental issue is structural. California's economy now requires multiple incomes to afford basic shelter, creating a system where working families cannot achieve housing stability despite employment. This represents a complete breakdown of the social contract. As cities increase enforcement, civil rights organizations warn that California may be entering dangerous legal territory. Lawsuits argue that banning vehicle habitation in public spaces violates constitutional protections when no alternative shelter is available. Advocates cite cases where RV dwellers faced excessive fines, unjust towing, and loss of personal property without due process. Some ordinances limit overnight parking to specific hours or require permits that low-income residents cannot obtain, effectively excluding them from entire cities. Legal scholars highlight concerns about discrimination, noting that many RV residents are seniors, disabled individuals, or people of color disproportionately affected by poverty. Lawsuits have already emerged in cities like Fresno, San Diego, and Mountain View, challenging the legality of strict parking bans. Meanwhile, recent federal rulings have shifted the landscape by allowing cities more authority to enforce anti-camping laws, intensifying tension between humanitarian needs and municipal rights. As 2026 approaches, California could see a wave of legal battles reshaping how cities handle RV homelessness. The outcome will determine whether enforcement-heavy strategies continue or whether courts will require more balanced approaches that respect civil liberties. The legal conflict fundamentally questions whether cities can criminalize homelessness when they have failed to provide adequate shelter alternatives. The resolution of these cases will establish precedent affecting homeless populations nationwide, potentially determining whether poverty becomes a prosecutable offense in modern America. California's RV homelessness crisis is heading toward a dangerous tipping point as winter 2026 approaches. Climate trends indicate colder storms, heavier rainfall, and more frequent flooding, conditions that older RVs are not equipped to withstand. Many residents rely on unsafe heating methods such as propane burners or portable generators, increasing fire and carbon monoxide risks. In previous winters, emergency responders reported hundreds of RV fires statewide, with several resulting in fatalities. Flood-prone regions like Sacramento, Stockton, and parts of Los Angeles pose additional threats. A single storm can displace entire RV communities. With cities expanding towing operations and reducing tolerated encampment areas, thousands of RV dwellers may have nowhere safe to go during severe weather. Shelters are already operating at over 90% capacity, and new beds are not being added fast enough to meet rising demand. Advocates warn that without immediate action, such as emergency safe parking expansion, heating assistance, and winterized shelter options, California could witness one of its worst humanitarian crises in years. Winter 2026 is not just a seasonal challenge. It is the moment where policy failures, economic pressures, and enforcement crackdowns collide, pushing the RV homelessness crisis to its breaking point. The coming winter represents a critical test of California's commitment to protecting its most vulnerable residents. Without emergency intervention, the state faces potential mass casualties among its homeless population. The most terrifying part is that this crisis is still growing. What do you think California should do before 2026 hits? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't miss our next video, where we dive into the states already preparing massive crackdowns in 2026.